Okay, we're back. We are discussing the Queen of Sheba now. This is Velikovsky's Ages and Chaos, Volume 1, and it covers roughly the Exodus to the time of King Akhenaten. And so we left off, I mentioned that we were going to be talking about the Queen of Sheba. And so Velikovsky begins this chapter by mentioning that, okay, so essentially now we've got this golden age on the horizon. The Hyksos have been driven out of Egypt, and so now Egypt and Israel itself are both kind of finally free of this Amalekite oppression. And Saul delivered this fatal blow to the Amalekites, and then David is establishing Jerusalem as his capital. And so here we are in the golden age of King Solomon. So, according to the scriptural narrative, you have all this wealth of Solomon, and that he reigned over the land from the Euphrates to the Philistines and the border of Egypt. So essentially, you have these two great kingdoms rising up at about the same time. The kingdom of Egypt, after regaining independence under Ahamos, a contemporary of King Saul, also achieved grandeur and glory under Amenhotep the first, Thutmose the first, Hatshepsut, and Thutmose the third. Egypt was, of course, now entering into this golden age. So the two realms, freed from the same oppressor, entered into trade relations and into relations of kinship. It says that Solomon took an Egyptian princess to be one of his wives, probably his chief wife. So we don't know her name, but we do know that the Pharaoh made an expedition against southern Palestine, the home of the Philistines, and gave it as dowry to his daughter. So the Pharaoh, whose name is also omitted in the scriptures, Talmudic tradition calls him Shishak, was, according to the scheme presented here, Thutmose I, the third king of the new kingdom. So in the Egyptian annals, it says that this king made an expedition into Retinue. Retinue would have been Palestine, and that may have been this expedition mentioned in the scriptures. So nothing positive can be established with these meager remnants, except that the Pharaoh actually crossed the Sinai Peninsula, waged a campaign of conquest in Philistia, and then proceeded peacefully to Palestine or Retinue, where he has some cause for rejoicing. Although very sparse words are preserved from the reign of Thutmose I, he was often mentioned as the father of Queen Hatshepsut. He shared the throne with her and made her his successor. Hatshepsut, the great and celebrated queen, left inscriptions, bas relief, and figures of herself in abundance. Okay, so he goes on. Here's Queen Hatshepsut, and he makes a case that she is actually the Queen of Sheba. Notice in her name, this Shep may be where they get the Sheba. That it actually comes from her name, not from her kingdom. He goes on to parallel her and Solomon. They both built palaces, magnificent temples. They were both very renowned. So, back to the scriptural narrative, from where did the Queen of Sheba come? And there's a lot of debate, and Velikovsky goes into some of that. Here it is quoted from chapter 10 of the first book of Kings. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, she came to prove Solomon with hard questions at Jerusalem, with a very great company and camels that bear spices and gold in abundance, and so forth. So, of course, there's a lot of legends about this mysterious or legendary relationship between Solomon and Queen of Sheba. There's often a thought that they have some kind of an affair, and produced offspring, that she may be one of his wives. So if she was the Queen of Sheba, she may have actually even been, the theory is that she may have been that wife of the Pharaoh that is mentioned in Scripture. And so he goes into, I'm not going to go into reading it line for line, but he does mention that the opinion is expressed in the Talmud that Sheba, in the name Queen of Sheba, is not a geographical designation, but a personal name. So then again, like I mentioned earlier, Hatshepsut, Sheba may have been the middle part of her name. It's also mentioned in the Jewish Antiquities of Josephus that she ruled as Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. And so here we have a clear indication the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia, but Egyptian history being removed 600 years from the synchronistic point in Israelite history could not present a woman ruling in Egypt and Ethiopia. So they couldn't find it because the scholars are 600 years off in their chronology of Egypt. It says the most convincing proof that Hatshepsut is the Queen of Sheba would be if they could find a record of the voyage to Jerusalem, and he says that record was written, it is preserved, and it does conform to the scriptural narrative. So Queen Hatshepsut built this magnificent temple called the most splendid of splendors at Deir el-Bahari near Thebes. You can look up on Google Images and you can see pictures of this temple. It says on the walls of this temple are engraved bas reliefs describing the life, the most important events of the reign of the Queen Hatshepsut. There's a series called the Punt reliefs, which are opposite to and symmetrical with the first series, which is that of her divine birth, that tells the story of the journey to the land of Punt, or the Holy Land. So in these inscriptions, Punt is referred to as the Holy Land. It says that that there's inscriptions that describe this journey on the walls of the race. There's Semitic people being pictured there. Also, there's a lot of exotic animals and plants that are pictured, and so archaeologists have a tough time identifying where Punt is because they are trying to look at the animals and the vegetation that's pictured and match it up to the region that those plants and animals are indigenous to. Now, Velikovsky makes a case that we know from the scriptures that King Solomon had all these plants and animals brought to him to study, and he believes that's what's actually being pictured on the walls of this temple. So the name of Punt, or divine, or Elohim's land, is not accompanied by the sign designating a foreign country, showing that the Egyptians regarded Punt as a land affiliated in some way with Egypt. In a number of Egyptian inscriptions, Punt is mentioned as situated to the east of Egypt. So we know that there was a very close relationship between the Israelites and the Egyptians, not just because the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, but if there was a joint expedition to expel the Amalekites, and especially if Queen Hatshepsut was one of the wives of Saul, then you can see why Palestine would not really be considered a foreign land. It would be like, I guess, a relationship that the Americas have with, like the United States has with Canada or something. Even though we're two separate countries, we see each other as like our sister country. He also mentions that there was an official of the 6th dynasty left a record that he visited Byblos and Punt 11 times. And so like these two, so you would think that Punt would be close to Byblos, which of course Israel is, and therefore Punt must be associated with Byblos. And there are numerous inscriptions that mention products of Punt and Elohim's land is being obtained in Palestine, or retinue. And so Velikovsky goes on to lay out a case that Punt is actually Israel. It says, in the previous chapters, a synchronism was presented between Egyptian and Hebrew histories. Queen Hatshepsut was found to be a contemporary of Solomon. And so I'm not wanting to read all this. If you're interested in it, I'd like for you to read it yourself. I'm just kind of going over a brief overview of it. So what was the journey like? He says the shortest route from Thebes to Jerusalem is not along the Nile and the coast of the Mediterranean. The Red Sea route is only a little more than half its distance. So she probably would have taken the sea route through the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Notice that in 1 Kings 9:26 it says that Solomon built a harbor on the Aqaba Gulf of the Red Sea. And that the Phoenician king Tyre, Hiram, sought an alliance with King Solomon, and his friendship possibly because of the naval base at Ezion Geber in the land of Edom. And so, one thing the Phoenicians were famous for is that they would even shipwreck their own ship in order to, like, if someone else was trying to follow them to learn their secret maritime routes, that the Phoenicians would actually run their ships aground and crash their ships to keep the secrets from being revealed to outsiders. And so he goes through the scriptures that mention this Hiram, and so that's kind of laying the groundwork for his. This kind of like a parallel between Solomon and Queen of Sheba. It says in the lower corner of the bas relief in Deir el-Barari is depicted a landing place, and from the right a king's messenger advances. The chief is called the chief of Punt, and his name is Parahu or Parua. On a tent is written pitching the tent of the king's messenger and his army on the Mur terraces of Punt on the side of the sea. And so this is basically this messenger of the king that was greeting the queen when she arrived from her journey. It says Parua must have been Solomon's representative in the land of Edom, possibly an Edomite vassal of his, and that among the 12 governors of King Solomon at a later period in his reign, that one of his officials was mentioned as a son of Parua. Jehoshaphat, the son of Parua, was governor in Ezion Geber and Eloth. His father apparently administered the same region, so he was actually governor over the same area that that Velikovsky believes that this queen would have been arriving from the sea at. And so also in the bas relief, it appears that the landscape is similar to that of Edom. So the belief there is that it was actually a connection, this Parua person that was the king's messenger. Okay, so we got some more details of her expedition. He goes into describing the bas reliefs. He says that in previous times, persons and missions had already been sent to Punt, but only meager and prosaic data are preserved. Punt must have been close to Egypt. This is intimated in various references in Egyptian monuments, such as the one already cited, in which an official who lived at the time of the 6th dynasty mentioned he had gone 11 times to Byblos and Punt. It says that the queen Hatshepsut undertook the journey like a devout pilgrim who, hearing an inner bidding, takes staff in hand. It says a command was heard from the great throne, an oracle of the god himself, that the ways of Punt should be searched out. And so from there, it was almost like she had an inner voice that spoke to her, and she thought it was her god. So she goes to Punt, and in fact, it's worth mentioning that this is obviously a huge monumental event for her to go. in order for it to be recorded on the walls of her temple, says that I have led them on water and on land to explore the waters of inaccessible channels, and I have reached the myrrh terraces. It also says the queen and her train, including her royal artists, were obviously impressed by the handsome appearance of the Israelite warriors. What did the ancient Israelites look like? He says we have been accustomed to seeing Syrian prisoners sculptured by the Egyptian craftsmen of later kings of the 18th dynasty and also the 19th and 20th dynasty. The beards of the captives are round and untrimmed, Socraic, the figures helpless. For the most part, they are portrayed at the moment of their execution. But here, on the Punt reliefs, the appearance of the dwellers in Elohim's land is dignified. Their noses are aquiline. Their eyes are set deep, their chins protruding, their beards resembling the beard of the god Ra. It is unprecedented and never happened again that the appearance of foreign soldiers pictured by the Egyptians should express more nobility and grace than the figures of the Egyptians themselves. The impression the Judean guard made on the guests is also told in a legend about the visit of the Queen of Sheba. King Solomon, who remained in Jerusalem, awaited his august guest, sent a procession of handsome youths to meet her. They were like the sunrise, the evening star, and the lily, and the queen was amazed. So you're getting an idea that in the same way that the visit of the Queen of Sheba to Jerusalem is something that was a very big deal to the Israelites, it was also a very big deal to her, to the Queen of Sheba herself. So he goes into some more details about it. I'm not going to really get into this necessarily. He does make some more parallels between the description in the scriptures and that of Solomon and the visit and such and so forth. But I think that's enough for now. When we come back, we're going to get into some of the later parallels also. So thank you for listening. Again, this PDF is in the description. You can download it if you'd like. And thank you, and we'll get further into it next time. Thank you.